The Supreme Court made a few key rulings this morning, one of which involves immigration. The High Court said non-citizens cannot be released on bond as they try to fight deportation. So for more on this, we want to bring in Jessica Levinson. She is a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Thanks for joining us, Jessica. So we are talking about the case of Johnson versus Guzman Chavez. I was trying to sort of quickly read about it. It's kind of a complicated case. How did the court rule?
Yeah, you and me both. It was kind of a complicated case. So what the court ruled is in favor of the government against immigrants. Basically, this case dealt with a fairly narrow band of immigrants who had already been deported, came back illegally across the border and said, I fear torture in my homeland. And the question was, which statutory provision under immigration law applied to them? Which is another way of saying the question was, could they be released on bond, or did they have to be held during that next round of removal proceedings? And the court answered, according to 6-3 ideological split, that you have to be held, you cannot be released on bond. So, as you said, it's a fairly complicated issue of immigration law. It only, and I don't mean only because obviously this is life and death to some people, but it applies to a fairly narrow group of immigrants. And the question was fairly narrow in the sense of, can you be released on bond while you're waiting to see if you will be sent back again? Or do you have to be detained while you're waiting for that second determination? Again, the answer is you need to be detained and you're not up for bail or conditional release while you're waiting for that second determination.
So as you already know, immigration and immigration policy is a pretty hot button issue. Does this have the ability or the likelihood to impact immigration policy moving forward, or is it just too limited to a particular group?
How about a lawyer's answer of maybe both? So it is on its face. The case is just limited to a fairly narrow band. But I think it indicates more in the sense that it is an immigration case. It does pit immigrants who are in this country illegally, who are unauthorized immigrants, against the government. And what we see here is that we currently have a Supreme Court that, at least on this statutory issue, has ruled 6-3 along ideological lines. So what could it mean going forward? It's another reminder that we have a conservative court, and it could signal to Congress, to the president, that we have a court that is potentially predisposed 6-3 to vote to side with the government. Again, we don't want to read too much into it, but it's another reminder that the composition of the court really does matter for the outcome of these cases.
Okay, so another case. Let's talk about another case with a narrow 5-4 decision. It's about a pipeline that was hoping to extend from Pennsylvania into New Jersey using New Jersey state land. What was at the heart of the case, and what was the final decision?
So the case was based on the Natural Gas Act, which I can assure you, not something we talk about every day. Again, a fairly narrow issue, but with big implications. So this was really the fossil fuel industry, in a way, against a state, against states' rights. And that's why I think you see this kind of, as SCOTUS Twitter said, funky lineup, in the sense that it was 5-4. They ruled in favor of this Penn East pipeline company, in favor of the fossil fuel company, against New Jersey. And there was a mix of liberals and conservatives in that majority. Briefly, what they ruled is that the Penn East pipeline company, this private fossil fuel company, can sue the state of New Jersey for eminent domain, meaning that they have more leverage when they are negotiating with states to say, we really, really need your land. We need this public land. So I think a win for private companies that, for instance, would want to lay pipeline or any type of infrastructure, and a loss for the states that say, we don't want you here. It's an issue of interpretation of the federal law, of eminent domain, and again, this matchup of two different actors where conventional wisdom is you would see conservatives typically siding with either the private corporation or the state when it comes to their land use rights. In this case, they were against each other, and that's why I think we have that kind of strange lineup.
So we've seen several recent cases where, the decisions of the justices did not fall along conservative versus liberal sort of lines. Can you see then, if it's not conservative and liberal, are there kind of like, is there another line in between that we can separate the justices by? Do you know what I'm trying to get at? If it's not conservative versus liberal, is there something else?
Yeah, right, meaning what's happening here. So I think a couple things. One is we tend to really focus on, this 6-3 conservative majority because that's how they typically fall on the quote unquote really controversial big cases. Let's think about abortion rights. Let's think about religious rights. Let's think about LGBTQ rights, probably Second Amendment rights. So there are some cases, and it's the cases that will splash across the front page of a newspaper where that 6-3 majority does hold. But I think your question and what we're seeing is that in so many cases, that's not the issue. It's not an issue of religious rights, or it's not an issue of your right to bear arms. It's an issue of statutory interpretation. It's an issue of what does the Natural Gas Act really mean? And that doesn't necessarily play on were you nominated by a Republican president or a Democratic president. I think what we're also seeing, and we really won't know this for years until biographers start writing the inside scoop, is that we're seeing new alliances in the court. I think we're seeing particularly Justice Elena Kagan, nominated by President Obama, trying to maneuver her way into finding consensus where they can. In part, that helps us view the court as more than just made up of politicians with robes on. And in part, I think she's playing the long game, and so is Chief Justice Roberts, trying to find where there's moments of consensus. One other thing, and then I promise I'll wrap up this answer, is that there are some areas where it really doesn't fall along the typical line. So I believe last week, of course, it's COVID and the Supreme Court, so time is elastic, but I think it was last week we talked about a Fourth Amendment case dealing with searches and seizures. That's another classic area where you don't see the typical splits, where it was police officers basically following a man who was playing his music too loudly into his garage. And the question was, do you need a warrant? And you do have the court in those cases. They don't have the usual split. So I think it's all of those things happening.
What other cases are we waiting for?
Just two, and now there are no more surprises. The court will give us those decisions Thursday at 10 a.m. and then at 10:10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the first big case we're waiting on is an Arizona case dealing with the Voting Rights Act, and specifically one provision deals with whether or not you can trash somebody's ballot if they vote in the wrong precinct on Election Day. Arizona says yes, we can. The challengers say that's not proper under the Voting Rights Act. Why would you trash their entire ballot? The other provision in Arizona deals with who can return your early ballot. Arizona says a fairly narrow group of people, just the people you live with or your caretakers or family members. The challengers say why. It should be a much broader group, like, for instance, in California. That will tell us about how strong the Voting Rights Act is going forward. The other case is actually out of California and deals with a disclosure provision, basically whether major donors have to report to the state their identities, or challengers say, look, we don't want to have to report that to you. It could be made public. We fear reprisals. We fear threats. That's a case that could have implications for issues of money in politics and even the continued reach of that 2010 Citizens United decision.
Should be interesting, and my guess is that we will be talking to you on Thursday. Jessica, so before we let you go, we've got to talk to you about something else. We are hearing now that investigators who have been looking into President Trump's business dealings will likely be filing some charges against the Trump Organization. So give us some insight. Just, what would that entail? So it's the Trump Organization, possibly some people connected to the organization, not Mr. Trump himself. So tell us about these potential charges and just how significant this development is.
So I think it is significant for the Trump Organization, but for a lot of people maybe watching at home right now, what they're really waiting to see is, will the former president be charged? And the answer is not right now. So there's a bigger, obviously, investigation going forward that involves the New York District Attorney's Office, and we just learned in May they've joined with the New York Attorney General's Office. And that investigation broadly is looking into issues of tax fraud and insurance and banking fraud, which again broadly asks, did the Trump Organization basically say for tax purposes, oh, this stuff isn't worth very much, don't tax us a lot. And then for getting loans and for getting insurance, did they say, oh, this stuff is really worth a lot, we should get a big loan? And so if they're inflating and deflating and they're doing that knowingly, they have the right level of intent, it's knowing and willful, then they could be subject to criminal violations. In this case, the reports we're hearing is that this potential indictment of the Trump Organization is essentially a first step. And so they're looking at a more specific issue of payments to executives and kind of fringe payments. What do we mean by that? You're an executive for the Trump Organization and you get a car. That wasn't part of your base salary, or even you get a plane. You get some sort of, quote, fringe benefit, but there are no taxes paid, so it looks like tax evasion. Reports are that that's what this is focusing on right now. Now, in terms of implications, pretty disastrous for the Trump Organization as an entity, because it likely means that the lenders will say, we'd like our money back, and it could bankrupt the organization. It also, let's remember, even though it's not an indictment of the former president, it's something we've never seen in American history, which is a former president having to defend his family company, the company that he helped create, against criminal charges if this does come to fruition. So it will be also interesting to see if there is an indictment. Will it put more pressure on Alan Weisselberg, the CEO of the Trump Organization, the CFO? Will it give him more pressure to cooperate? So it's a question of will this be the only domino, or will it set in effect a larger series of events? And wish I could tell you I have the inside track and I know, but right now we just don't know.
Mm-hmm. So Jessica, obviously organizations and businesses don't go to jail. You mentioned, the possible fallout when it comes to the business relationships that the organization would have with other banks. They might say, give us our money back. You weren't honest if convicted. But what punishment, if convicted, could the state sort of deliver? Is this basically like an organization that would maybe be fined for this behavior, but in terms of the punishment, the painfulness of the punishment, it's not going to happen in the court? It will most likely happen outside of the court?
I think that's right. It depends on the level of monetary damages that would be at issue here. I mean, you could see a lot of money to the extent where it does become painful. Now, of course, when it comes to an organization, there are basically two tracks, as you mentioned. There's one where we're just focused on the organization. Obviously, you can't put an entity in jail. And another is that you can basically pierce through that corporate veil. You can pierce the organization and find an individual that's subject to the criminal charges. I think we're not at door number 2 right now. I think we're still in door number 1. As you said, we're in the land of an entity and we're dealing with monetary damages. Big question as to how big those damages would be. And I think your inclination in the question is right, that the fallout, if it's just the Trump Organization, again, depending on what potential monetary damages would be, and assuming there's no kind of person attached to it, that the fallout would be outside the courtroom. Lenders fleeing, the organization is bankrupt and completely discredited, etc.
Interesting stuff. Jessica Levinson, thank you very much.
Thank you.